I won $127 million in the lottery and didn't tell anyone. My daughter said, "Mom, you have to pay us rent if you're living in our house." For a year, I pretended. But when I bought a mansion and they accidentally found out that I was the new owner. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who keeps secrets. For most of my 71 years, I wore my heart on my sleeve. My late husband Harold used to say I couldn't lie to save my life. He meant it as a compliment, I think. My name is Dorothy Eileen Marsh, and for 43 years, I lived in a white clapboard house on Sycamore Lane in Dayton, Ohio. Harold and I raised 2 children there. Our son, Patrick, who moved to Portland and calls every Sunday, and our daughter, Linda, who stayed close. Too close, as it turned out. Harold passed in 2019, a heart attack on a Tuesday morning, quick and without warning, the way he would have wanted. He hated fuss. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathy cards piled up on the kitchen counter, I was alone in that house for the first time in my adult life. It was Linda who suggested I move in with her and her husband, Craig. "Mom, that house is too big for one person," she said. And at the time, it felt like love. I sold the house on Sycamore Lane for $214,000, a fair price, and I moved into the spare bedroom of Linda and Craig's colonial in Kettering. The room had a window that looked out over their backyard, and in the mornings, I could watch the cardinals at the bird feeder I'd hung from the oak tree. I told myself I was happy. I mostly believed it. For the first year, things were fine. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week. I babysat their younger one, Tyler, when they needed me to. I stayed out of their way. I paid for my own groceries. I didn't ask for much. I had my Social Security and a small pension from the school district, where I'd worked as an administrative assistant for 22 years. It wasn't a fortune, but I was careful. I'd always been careful. The trouble started so gradually, I almost didn't notice it. Craig lost his sales manager position in the spring of 2022. I understood. Layoffs happen, the economy shifts, nobody's fault. But something changed in the house after that. The air got tighter. Linda started watching the thermostat the way a hawk watches a field. She bought store-brand everything and left the receipts on the counter as if they were messages. Craig spent long hours in his home office and came out for dinner looking hollowed out, barely speaking. I tried to help where I could. I paid for Tyler's new school shoes without being asked. I quietly slipped $200 into the household jar Linda kept on the kitchen shelf for incidentals. I didn't make a production of it. That wasn't my style. But small kindnesses, I was learning, don't survive in an atmosphere of resentment. They get absorbed without thanks and then forgotten. The first real warning came on a Wednesday evening in October. I was making tea in the kitchen when I heard Linda and Craig talking in the living room. They hadn't heard me come in from the backyard. I wasn't eavesdropping. I simply froze when I heard my own name. "She's not contributing," Craig said. His voice was flat, matter of fact. The voice of a man doing arithmetic. "She lives here. She uses the utilities. She eats the food. She helps with Tyler. That's not money, Linda." There was a silence. Then Linda said something I couldn't quite make out. I set my mug down very carefully and went to my room. I told myself it was stress talking. I told myself Craig was frustrated, and people say things they don't mean when they're frightened about money. I told myself a lot of things that October, and I believed most of them. Then came the morning that I cannot forget. It was a Saturday, the first week of November. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee and my crossword puzzle, a ritual as old as my marriage, when Linda sat down across from me. She had that careful look on her face, the one she gets when she's rehearsed something. "Mom," she said, "Craig and I have been talking. We think it's only fair, since you're living here, using the space, the utilities, that you contribute, like rent." I looked up from my crossword. "Rent," I said. "It doesn't have to be a lot. Maybe $600 a month? That's well below market rate for a room in this neighborhood." I looked at my daughter. My daughter. The child I had stayed up with through ear infections and college application panic and a broken engagement at 24. And I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter and more permanent than anger. "Let me think about it," I said. I went back to my crossword. 11 across. Betrayal. 7 letters. It fit. That afternoon, I sat in my room with the door closed and did what I had not done in a long time. I thought clearly, not emotionally. I had spent enough years in school administration to know that emotions are useful for understanding a situation, but terrible for solving one. I let myself feel the hurt for exactly as long as it took to acknowledge it. My own daughter had looked me in the eye at that kitchen table and asked me to pay for the privilege of sleeping in a spare room in her house. The house I had helped them with the down payment on, quietly, without conditions, back in 2014, when they'd come up $18,000 short and hadn't known where to turn. I had never mentioned that $18,000, not once. And sitting in that spare room, my spare room apparently, at $600 a month, I understood for the first time that my silence had not been generosity. It had been a mistake. I opened the small notebook I kept in my bedside drawer, the one Harold had given me the last Christmas before he died. I began to make a list. Not of grievances. I was too old for grievance lists. But of facts. Moved in. March 2021. Contributed to household. Groceries, babysitting, $200 cash monthly gifts. Tyler's school shoes, $87. Household repairs I arranged and partially paid for. Kitchen faucet, $340. Down payment assistance, 2014, $18,000. Total approximate contribution over 20 months, roughly $6,200 plus labor. Their ask, $600 per month, retroactive, going forward. My income, Social Security $1,340 per month, pension $610 per month, total $1,950 per month. $600 was nearly a third of my income. It was also, I realized, a number they had chosen because they assumed I could not refuse it and could not leave. Where would I go? That was the calculation behind Linda's careful expression at the breakfast table. She had done the math on her mother. And here is where I have to tell you something. Something I had told no one. 6 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday evening in September, while Linda and Craig were at Tyler's soccer game and I was alone in the house, I had checked the Ohio Lottery website out of habit. I played a dollar scratch-off most weeks. It was a small pleasure I'd had since my 30s. But that Tuesday, I had also entered the Mega Millions drawing online, something I had done perhaps a dozen times in my life. My numbers had come up, not partially, not 2 or 3, all 6 numbers, including the mega ball. The jackpot that week was $127 million. The lump sum cash option, after federal and state taxes, came to just under $72 million. I had sat in that kitchen for a long time after reading the confirmation email. Then I had made myself a cup of chamomile tea, washed the mug, dried it, put it away, and gone to bed. I had not told Linda. I had not called Patrick. I had not told a single living soul. Why? People always ask that. And the honest answer is that I didn't fully understand it myself at first. Part of it was Harold's voice in my head. Don't make decisions when you're rattled, Dot. And part of it was something more instinctive. I had grown up without money, and I had watched what money did to families. I wanted to understand what was around me before I changed anything. And now, sitting in my room with Linda's rental proposal still ringing in my ears, I understood exactly what was around me. I had not been paranoid. I had been prescient. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. Not the family lawyer Harold and I had used for our wills. I wanted someone Linda didn't know. I found an estate and tax attorney named Richard Okafor through a colleague of Patrick's, a man in Columbus who specialized in exactly the kind of situation I was now in. A large, sudden inheritance of wealth that needed to be structured carefully and kept private. I called his office from my cell phone, walking around the block, and made an appointment for the following Thursday. Richard turned out to be a quiet, methodical man in his early 50s, who took notes in a small leather journal and asked questions without expression. I liked him immediately. I told him everything. The lottery win, the family situation, my living arrangement, Linda's rental request. He listened without interrupting. The first thing we need to do, he said, is claim the prize correctly and establish a trust structure before any funds are accessible. The second thing is to give you time. Time is your most valuable asset right now. Time, he explained, meant anonymity. Ohio allowed lottery winners to claim through a trust, which meant my name would not appear in public records. The trust would be the winner. Dorothy Eileen Marsh would simply be the trustee. And the third thing? I asked. He looked at me. The third thing is to make absolutely no changes in your daily behavior until you are ready. Can you do that? I thought of Linda's careful face at the breakfast table. I thought of Craig's voice through the wall. She's not contributing. Yes, I said. I've had some practice. I drove home, made dinner, pot roast, Tyler's favorite, set the table, and when Linda said, "Mom, have you thought about what we discussed?" I said, "I'm still thinking, sweetheart," and passed her the bread basket. I was the calmest I had felt in months. The trust was established on a Thursday afternoon in late November in Richard Okafor's Columbus office on the 14th floor of a glass building that looked out over the Scioto River. I had told Linda I was visiting an old friend from the school district, Mary Ann, who genuinely lived in Columbus and genuinely would have covered for me if asked, because she'd never liked Craig. I wasn't worried about the alibi. I was thinking about the documents in front of me. The trust was named the DME Family Trust, my initials, Harold's middle name for the E, a small private tribute he would have found quietly amusing. Richard had structured it carefully. The lottery funds would flow into the trust would hold all assets, and Dorothy Eileen Marsh would appear nowhere in any public filing as a lottery winner. I signed where he indicated. My hand was steady. I had not expected it to be steady, but it was. The funds will clear in approximately 8 to 10 business days, Richard said. At that point, we can begin discussing how you'd like to proceed. I'd like to buy a house, I said. He nodded as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world, which I appreciated. We can do that through the trust. Your name will be on the deed as trustee, but only if someone looks carefully at the ownership chain. To a casual observer, you're simply a woman who bought a house. That's all I am, I said. I drove back to Kettering in my 2016 Buick. I had decided, quite deliberately, to keep driving the Buick, and arrived in time to pick Tyler up from school. He talked about a science project involving volcanoes the entire way home, and I listened to every word. It was the following week when things began to shift inside the house. I noticed it first in small ways. Linda started asking, with a casualness that wasn't casual at all, about my finances. Had I looked into whether I qualified for any senior housing assistance? Was my pension indexed to inflation? Had Harold left any life insurance she didn't know about? The questions were wrapped in concern, delivered over coffee or during commercial breaks, but they formed a pattern. Craig was doing the same thing in a different register. He mentioned twice, almost offhandedly, that some people in my situation found it made sense to consolidate assets and that he had a friend in financial planning. I answered everything vaguely and pleasantly. I had always been a good listener. Now I was becoming an equally good deflector. But the true evidence, the thing that crossed the line from suspicion to proof, came on a Saturday afternoon when I went looking for my reading glasses and found myself by accident in Craig's home office. The door was ajar. I wasn't snooping. I was genuinely looking for my glasses, which I sometimes left in odd places. But I stopped when I saw my name on a piece of paper on his desk. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I stepped inside, calmly, deliberately, and looked at the paper. It was a printout, a legal document, partially filled out, a form I recognized because I had seen similar forms in Richard's office. It was a power of attorney form. Under principal, someone had typed my full name, Dorothy Eileen Marsh. Under agent, the name was Craig Allen Whitfield, his own name. The form was unsigned, but it had been printed from a legal document website, and someone, Craig, presumably, had filled in my name, my date of birth, my current address. He had written it as if it were already decided. I set the paper down exactly as I had found it. I left the office. I found my reading glasses on the bathroom shelf, where they'd been all along. I sat down in the kitchen and read 3 pages of my novel without absorbing a single word. That evening, after Tyler was in bed, I excused myself early, said I was tired, and went to my room. I took out my phone and wrote Richard Okafor a brief email. I've discovered something that may be relevant to our planning. Please call me when you can. He called the next morning. I described what I had seen. There was a brief silence. A pre-filled POA form, he said slowly. Not signed. Not yet, Dorothy. His voice was measured. This tells us something important. It tells us there is an intention. Whether or not they know about the lottery, and based on what you've described, I don't believe they do. Someone in that house has been thinking about controlling your financial decisions. I already knew that. But hearing it stated plainly by a lawyer on a Monday morning made it different. More real. More urgent. What do I do? I asked. You continue exactly as you have been, he said, and we accelerate our timeline. That was the point of no return. I knew it then. Whatever remained of my uncertainty, whatever small voice had been telling me I was overreacting, that Linda was stressed and Craig was frightened and families do hurtful things they don't mean, went quiet. Some things you cannot unknow. A pre-filled power of attorney with your name already typed in is one of them. The house I chose was in Indian Hill, the kind of Cincinnati suburb that doesn't announce itself, where the properties sit behind old oaks and long driveways, and the neighbors don't peer through fences. It was a Georgian colonial, 5 bedrooms, built in 1987 and renovated twice since, with a library that smelled of cedar and a kitchen garden that had gone a little wild. The asking price was $2.1 million. The DME Family Trust purchased it in cash, closing in December, 3 days before Christmas. I did not move in immediately. That was Richard's advice and also my own instinct. I continued living in Linda and Craig's spare room, continued making pot roast and picking Tyler up from school, continued paying the $600 a month. I had agreed to it finally in early November, because refusal would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. Every month, I wrote the check in my steady school teacher's handwriting and left it on the kitchen counter without comment. Linda always said thank you without quite meeting my eyes. In January, I hired an interior designer through the trust, a woman named Sasha, who worked for a firm in Cincinnati and communicated entirely by email, professional and discreet. I furnished the Indian Hill house from a distance, making decisions about paint colors and furniture layouts during long afternoons when Craig was in his office and Linda was at her part-time marketing job and Tyler was at school. I kept a second phone, a simple, prepaid one, for anything trust-related. I charged it in my car. It was Craig who found out first. Not the full truth, not the lottery, not the trust, not the house, but enough. I don't know exactly how he found it. Richard later suggested it may have been a property tax record search. Craig had some background in real estate sales and would have known how to look. Or perhaps it was something simpler. He had seen the name of Richard's firm on a piece of mail that had been forwarded to me, or heard a fragment of a phone call I thought I'd taken privately. In any case, on a Tuesday evening in late January, Craig came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes and closed the door behind him. "I've been doing some research," he said. I turned off the tap. I turned around. I kept my expression pleasant, the same expression I had used for 30 years of parent-teacher conferences and difficult personnel conversations. "Oh," I said. "I found a law firm in Columbus that had your name associated with a trust filing." He paused, watching my face. "Richard Okafor, estate and tax law." I said nothing. "Dorothy." His voice shifted. Not threatening, not yet, but with a pressure behind it, the way weather shifts before a storm. "If you've come into some money, an inheritance maybe, something Harold had set aside, that affects this family. That affects Linda." "Craig," I said, "I don't know what you think you found." "I think I found that you have a lawyer you haven't mentioned and a trust structure you set up without telling anyone in this family." His voice was harder now. "And I think that if you're planning to do something with money that should benefit Linda, her mother's money, family money, while she and I are struggling, while we've been generous enough to take you in, generous enough," I repeated quietly, "then we have a right to know about it. And if you won't tell us voluntarily, we have options. Linda is your daughter. There are legal mechanisms for—" "Stop." My voice was very calm. I surprised myself with how calm it was. "Craig, I want you to think carefully about what you're about to say next." He stopped. "I am a competent adult," I said. "I have my own legal counsel. Whatever financial arrangements I have made are entirely my own business, and any attempt to interfere with them legally will be met with a response that you will not enjoy." I picked up my dish towel and dried my hands. "Now, I'm going to suggest that this conversation never happened and that you think very carefully about the power of attorney form I saw on your desk in November." The color left his face. "I haven't signed anything," I said pleasantly, "and I don't intend to." He left the kitchen. I heard him go upstairs. I heard the low murmur of voices, his and Linda's, urgent, muffled by the ceiling. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard and the bird feeder I had hung in the oak tree. And I thought about Harold and about cardinals and about patience and about— 3 days later, I told Linda I was going to visit Patrick in Portland for a week. She hugged me at the door, a brief, careful hug, and said to have a good trip. I drove to Indian Hill instead. I spent 5 days in my own house. I walked every room. I read in the Cedar Library. I planted the first seeds of the spring in the kitchen garden, early and optimistic. I slept in a bedroom that was entirely mine, in a bed I had chosen, in a silence that belonged to no one but me. On the 4th morning, I sat on the back porch with my coffee and felt something I had not felt in years. Not triumph, something quieter, safety. I came back from Portland, from Indian Hill, on a Sunday afternoon, and the house in Kettering had the careful, over-tidied look of a place where people have been having difficult conversations. Linda had made a lemon cake. Craig was nowhere in sight. Tyler ran to meet me at the door and showed me a drawing he'd done of a volcano, which I taped to the refrigerator with the seriousness it deserved. The temptation came the next evening, and it was Linda who delivered it. She sat down with me after dinner, after Tyler was in bed and Craig had retreated to his office, and she was the version of herself I found most difficult. Soft, uncertain, genuinely sad. Not performing sadness, actually sad. She had her father's eyes, Linda did. That was always the complication. "Mom," she said, "Craig told me about your conversation, about the lawyer." I waited. "I don't want it to be like this," she said. "I don't want us to be adversarial. You're my mother. I love you." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I believed it was real. That was the hard part. Loving someone and behaving badly toward them are not mutually exclusive. I had learned that long ago. "I love you too, Linda," I said. "Then talk to me. If you have something, if there's money, whatever it is, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I just want to understand. Craig is scared. I'm scared. We're underwater, Mom. The mortgage, his job situation, it's bad. And you're here and you're—" She stopped, started again. "What is the trust for?" It was a good question, honestly asked. And for a moment, one real moment, I felt the pull of it. The desire to simply tell her, to make the fear in her face go away, to be her mother in the simplest possible sense. But I thought of the power of attorney form, Craig's neat typing, Dorothy Eileen Marsh, principal, the form that had been filled out and printed and left on a desk, waiting. "I have an estate plan," I said. "Every adult should have one. My lawyer helped me update mine. That's all I'm going to say about it." Linda looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, and went to bed. The next morning, Craig was pleasant at the breakfast table. Elaborately pleasant. Complimenting my coffee, asking about Tyler's homework, laughing at something on his phone. It was the pleasantness of a man who has changed tactics, and I noted the change the way you note a shift in wind direction. Useful information, nothing more. I was not afraid of their watching. I had nothing left for them to find. But I knew I needed support. Not legal support, Richard had that covered, but the kind of support that exists between women who have known each other long enough to speak in shorthand. I called Marianne that afternoon, walking my usual loop around the block. Marianne Pierce had been my closest friend for 31 years. We had worked together in the Dayton School District for 2 decades, raised children at roughly the same time, buried husbands 18 months apart. She was sharp, discreet, and constitutionally incapable of being impressed by money, which was one of her best qualities. I told her everything. Standing on a sidewalk in Kettering in February, in a heavy coat, watching a gray squirrel dismantle someone's bird feeder, I told Marianne Pierce about $127 million, about the trust, about the Indian Hill house, about the power of attorney form, about Linda's lemon cake and Craig's elaborate breakfast pleasantness. She was quiet for a long time. "Dot," she finally said, "you are the most controlled human being I have ever known in my life, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment." "I'm not controlled," I said. "I'm frightened." "Those aren't mutually exclusive either," she said, which was, I realized, almost exactly what I had thought about Linda the night before. There was something both comforting and humbling about the symmetry. Marianne offered to come to Dayton for a weekend. I said not yet. I didn't want unfamiliar variables in the house, but knowing she knew was enough. It changed the texture of my solitude. I was no longer keeping a secret alone. I was keeping it in trusted company. She called me every other day after that. Quick calls, casual on the surface. How's Tyler? How's the garden? Have you heard from Patrick? Coded reassurance. I know, I'm here. You're not alone. It was enough. Some days it was more than enough. March came in cold and wet, and with it, a Saturday morning I had not been expecting. I was in the kitchen at 7, the early hour that belongs to me. Coffee, crossword, the sound of the house breathing before anyone else woke. When Linda appeared in her bathrobe and sat down across from me with the deliberate air of a person who has been up for a while already, thinking. Craig followed a minute later, which told me the seating had been choreographed. They had discussed this. They had planned it. Tyler was still asleep upstairs, and I was grateful for that. Whatever was about to happen, I did not want him to witness it. Mom, Linda said, we want to start fresh. I set down my pen. Craig had brought a folder. He set it on the table between us like a peace offering, except that peace offerings don't come in folders. Inside were printed pages. I could see the tabs from where I sat. Financial documents of some kind. He had taken care with this presentation, I noticed. The folder was a proper one, not something grabbed from a desk drawer. He had prepared. We've been approaching this all wrong, Craig said. He had his reasonable voice on, the one I imagined he'd used in sales presentations. We've been stressed. We've let it affect how we treat you, and that's not fair. We want to fix that. I appreciate that, I said. Part of fixing it, Linda said, is being honest about where we are financially. We're behind on the mortgage. We're 3 months behind, actually. The bank has started foreclosure proceedings. She paused. If we lose this house, we lose everything. Tyler changes schools. Craig and I... She stopped. I looked at her. I looked at Craig. I waited. We need help, Mom. Real help. Craig opened the folder and turned it toward me. The top page was a document, another legal form. This one I recognized more quickly. It was a gift deed, pre-filled, and the property line was blank, but the donor line already read Dorothy Eileen Marsh. So this was it. This was the plan behind the plan. Not $600 a month in rent. A gift of assets. Whatever they had guessed I had, or perhaps by now, whatever Craig had managed to piece together through his property searches, they wanted it transferred. Formally. Irrevocably. I looked at the document for a long moment, at my own name in someone else's careful typing, and I felt the particular cold clarity that comes when you stop hoping you were wrong about something. If you helped us save the house, Linda said softly, it would be for Tyler. It would be for family. And in return, Mom, whatever arrangements you need, we'd make sure you were taken care of. Always. You'd never have to worry about anything. Taken care of? Two of the most dangerous words in the English language, when spoken by someone who has already printed out your name on a power of attorney form. Linda, I said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. She nodded. If I had nothing, if I had no trust, no assets, nothing beyond my Social Security and my pension, would you still be asking me this? Would Craig still have brought a folder to the breakfast table? Silence. Because that's the question, I said. Not whether you love me. I know you love me in the way that you do. The question is whether this conversation is about me or about what you think I have. Craig's jaw tightened. Linda looked at the table. We're in real trouble, Mom, he said. And now the reasonable voice was fraying at the edges. We've been generous with you. We took you in when Harold died. We gave you a home. We... You charged me $600 a month, I said quietly. After I helped with your down payment. After years of free childcare and cooking, and the 1,000 invisible things women do that nobody prices until they need something in return. I folded my hands on the table. I'm not angry about the rent, Craig. I understand financial pressure, but don't use the word generous to me this morning. I need you not to do that. He stood up. His chair scraped the floor hard enough that I heard it echo off the kitchen tiles. So, that's it? Your family is drowning, and you sit there with your lawyer and your trust and your secrets, and you say no? I haven't said no to anything, I said. I haven't said anything at all. You've said plenty, he said, and left the kitchen. Linda sat for a moment longer. I could see the war going on behind her eyes, the part of her that was genuinely frightened, and the part of her that had agreed to this plan, had sat down at this table and opened this folder and delivered these lines. I didn't know even then how much of it was Craig's design and how much was her own. I'm not sure she knew either. That ambiguity was perhaps the saddest part of the whole morning. The fact that I could not be entirely certain my daughter was a villain, only that she had been willing to act like one when the stakes were high enough. I'm sorry it's come to this, Mom, she said. Then she left, too. I sat alone in the kitchen with my cold coffee and my crossword and the gray March morning pressing against the window, and I felt the fear. I want to be honest about that. I felt real fear. Not of losing money, not of lawyers or court filings, but of something older and harder to name. The fear of being truly alone, of having protected myself so well that no one could reach me anymore, including the people I had once loved without conditions. That fear was real, and I let it be real for exactly as long as it needed to be. But underneath it, bedrock solid, was something else. Something that had been building since November, since the lemon cake, since the folder on the breakfast table. I was done being managed. I moved out of Linda and Craig's house on a Wednesday in April, between school drop-off and lunch. I had packed over the course of 3 weeks, a little each day, replacing pictures and books and small objects with careful nothings, so that the room changed so gradually that no one noticed. The morning I left, I stripped the bed, washed and folded the linens, left them on the mattress. I took my bird feeder from the oak tree. I left a brief note on the kitchen counter. I've found other arrangements. The room is yours. Thank you for the time. Dorothy. I drove to Indian Hill. I want to tell you what it felt like to pull into that driveway for the first time as someone who was staying. The oaks were beginning to leaf out in pale green, and the kitchen garden had the first tentative suggestions of spring, the soil dark and promising after the winter. And Sasha's work inside? The warm rooms, the cedar library, the simple ordered surfaces, was everything I had asked for, and nothing more. I stood in the front hallway for a moment with my car keys in my hand and said nothing at all. There was no one to say anything to, and for the first time in years, that was not a loneliness, but a luxury. Then I made coffee and called Marianne. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing from Linda. No calls, no texts. I assumed Craig had told her not to reach out while they planned their next move. And Richard confirmed, in a brief call, that he had received an inquiry from a Columbus attorney who appeared to be making preliminary research into trust structures and family law. They were still probing, but probing costs money, and money was their stated problem. It was Tyler who broke the silence. He texted me. He was 12, and I had always been careful to maintain our own private line of communication, separate from his parents. Grandma, are you okay? Mom says you moved. Are you coming to my soccer game Saturday? I texted back. I'm wonderful, sweetheart. Wouldn't miss it. I arrived at the soccer field on Saturday with a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, and Tyler waved at me from the field with the uncomplicated joy of a child who had not yet been taught to make his love conditional. I sat 3 rows from Linda, who saw me and then looked away. There was something in that sideways glance, not quite shame, not quite defiance, that told me she was still deciding what she was. I had known her face for 50 years, and I could still read it, even when I wished I couldn't. Craig was not there. At halftime, Linda walked over. She did not sit down. You could have told us you were leaving, she said. I left a note. You could have talked to us. Linda, I said, we tried talking in March. You brought a gift deed to breakfast. She flinched. That was Craig's idea. I know, I said, but you sat there. She was quiet for a moment. Around us, other parents were talking about the game, about weekend plans, about ordinary things. The ordinary world continuing in all directions, indifferent to the particular difficulty of 2 women standing 3 feet apart with 40 years of complicated love between them. Mom, she said, her voice lower, Craig found the property records, the Indian Hill House. He knows the trust owns it. She stopped, looked around. He's talking to a lawyer about contesting it, about making an argument that that you needed guidance in your financial decisions and didn't get it, and that the assets should be, that I'm incompetent, I said. She looked genuinely pained. I told him not to. I told him, Linda. I looked at her steadily. I am going to tell you something once, and I need you to hear it. I have documentation of everything. The power of attorney form Craig filled out with my name, the gift deed brought to breakfast, the phone inquiry to my attorney's office. I have a lawyer who has been building a record since November. If Craig files anything, alleging that I am not competent to manage my own affairs, that record will be in front of a judge within days, and the story it tells will be very clear. I paused. He will not win, and the attempt will cost him considerably more than a foreclosed mortgage. Linda was very still. More importantly, I said, and here I let my voice soften slightly, because this was the truest thing I would say to her that day. You are my daughter. I have never wanted to be your adversary. I would have done almost anything for you. I spent my whole life doing things for you. And if you had come to me in genuine difficulty and asked for genuine help, the answer might have been different than you expect. But there is a difference between helping someone and being managed by them. There is a difference between a mother and a resource. I needed you to know which one I am. She didn't answer. Her eyes were bright in a way that meant she was holding something back. Tyler scored a goal in the second half. Both of us cheered, instinctively, simultaneously, and for a moment we looked at each other with the uncomplicated shared joy of it. And I saw something shift in her face. Something that had been clenched for a long time let go, just slightly, the way cold ground softens in the first real day of spring. She left without speaking to me again, but she didn't look like someone who had made up her mind. That was enough. That was actually quite a lot. The following Monday, Richard called to tell me that the attorney who had made inquiries on behalf of Craig had withdrawn. No filing had been made. The threat, such as it was, had dissolved. What changed his mind? I asked. Richard was quiet for a moment. Hard to say. Sometimes people do the arithmetic. I thought of Craig at the breakfast table with his folder. I thought of the arithmetic he must have done. The cost of litigation against a competent adult with a documented paper trail, against an estate attorney with 30 years of experience, against a woman who had quietly built every wall before he'd even understood she was building. What did you think would happen, Craig? What exactly was your plan? The foreclosure on Linda and Craig's house completed in June. I know this because Tyler told me. He called from his phone on a Tuesday evening, his voice careful and young, and said they were moving to a rental in Beaver Creek. He asked if I was going to come see the new place. "Of course I will," I said, "whenever you want." "Mom's upset," he said. "I know. She cried for a long time." I held the phone and looked out the window of my Indian Hill study at the yard, where the kitchen garden was in full summer now. Tomatoes and basil and the volunteer sunflowers I had not planted but kept anyway because I liked their uncomplicated optimism. The kind of growing things that ask for nothing in particular and give back more than you expect. I had come to think of the garden that way, as a kind of instruction in what generosity actually looks like. "Tyler," I said carefully, "your mom is going through something hard, and she loves you very much. What's happening with your parents isn't about you at all." "I know," he said, in the way 12-year-olds say "I know" to mean I need to be told anyway. "I'll come to your next game," I said. "I'll bring the thermos." The good one with the green lid? The very one. I was not without grief. I want to be clear about that. The victory, and it was a victory, was not clean or uncomplicated or triumphant in any Hollywood sense. My daughter's house was gone. My daughter was crying in a rental in Beaver Creek. The family I had imagined, the particular future I had carried in some quiet part of myself since the day Linda was born. The future with Sunday dinners and shared Christmases and grandchildren who grew up knowing the full shape of their grandmother, was not the family that had turned out to exist. That was real loss. It sat beside the relief, quietly coexisting, the way grief and gratitude so often do when a situation has gone on long enough that both become true at once. But here is what else happened in that June. Richard, having confirmed that all legal threats had definitively withdrawn, filed the final documentation that made the Indian Hill property fully and unambiguously mine. Dorothy Eileen Marsh, as trustee, and thereafter, as individual owner if I chose. We also completed the estate planning documents that ensured my actual wishes, my genuine wishes, were legally protected. Patrick was my primary executor. Mary Ann held a secondary power of attorney, a real one signed by me, given to someone I trusted. Tyler was named as a beneficiary in my trust, in an educational account I established to cover his college entirely. No conditions, no strings, just the future I wanted to give him. Not Linda, not Craig, not under the current circumstances. Tyler. That felt right. It felt like the most precise expression of what I actually believed, that love should flow toward innocence, and that the people who bet on my helplessness had simply bet wrong. Tyler had never asked me for anything I didn't want to give. He had texted to ask if I was okay. He had waved at me from a soccer field with his whole uncomplicated heart. That is the kind of person who deserves to have someone in their corner, quietly, for the long term. I also did something else in June. I called the pastor of the small Methodist church I had attended irregularly since moving to Kettering, a Reverend Elaine Crowther, who had presided over a memorial service I'd gone to for a neighbor. I told her I wanted to make a donation. Not publicly, not with my name on anything. I had learned my lesson about names on things, but a substantial one, toward the church's food pantry and their after-school tutoring program for kids in the lower-income neighborhoods nearby. She asked how I had come to this. Not the money, she was too tactful for that. But the decision. I thought about it for a moment. I thought about the kitchen table in November and the crossword puzzle and 11 across. I thought about Harold saying, "Don't make decisions when you're rattled, Dot." I thought about what it had felt like to stand in my own hallway for the first time, with my car keys in my hand, and understand that I had built this. I was reminded recently, I said, that it matters very much what you do with what you have, and that the most important question is who it helps. She thanked me. I said it was a privilege. And I meant it, not in the polite, reflexive way of social exchange, but in the genuine way, the way that means I understand what I have and I choose to use it this way. That understanding, I had come to believe, was worth more than the money itself. In July, I had a proper housewarming. Mary Ann drove up from Dayton and stayed for 3 days, sleeping in the rose-colored guest room and complaining cheerfully about the guest bathroom's excessive tasteful towels. Patrick flew in from Portland with his wife Denise and their daughters, who were 9 and 12 and climbed every climbable surface on the property with the enthusiasm of people who had never been told not to. Richard came for an hour with a bottle of good wine he selected himself. We sat on the back porch in the July evening, and I thought, this is it. This is the thing that was always available to me, and I simply needed to stop negotiating for permission to have it. Nobody had ever been able to give me permission but myself. It had taken me 71 years to understand that in the bone-deep, unshakable way that makes it true. Craig and Linda did not come. I had not invited them. But I had sent a card to Tyler with a gift card for the bookstore he liked, and he had texted back 3 exclamation points and a volcano emoji, which was all the response I needed. The Cardinals had found the bird feeder in the Indian Hill yard. I had hung it in an ash tree near the garden, and they came every morning now. The male with his impossible red, the female with her dignified rust and olive. Harold's birds still. Some things travel with you, across every house and every loss and every new beginning, and they ask nothing except that you put out the feeder and pay attention. I sat on my porch in the July evening with my friends around me and watched the last light leave the garden, and I thought, I am 71 years old, and I have a cedar library and a kitchen garden and one honest friend who complains about the towels. And I chose every single thing that is here. Not much and more than enough, all at once. The second year in Indian Hill moved the way good years move, steadily, without drama, with small pleasures that accumulate into something you only recognize as happiness when you stop and actually look at it. I joined a garden club in September, the kind of unhurried organization that meets on Thursday mornings and argues amiably about whether hostas are overused, which they are, but in a forgivable way. Through the club, I met Eleanor Marsh Taggart, no relation, though she found the shared name amusing. A retired landscape architect with strong opinions about soil drainage and an equally strong instinct for honest conversation. We became friends the way women of a certain age become friends, quickly, without ceremony, on the basis of recognizing something reliable in each other before either of us had said anything particularly revealing. Through Eleanor, I found a loose circle of women who met for dinner once a month at rotating houses, ate too well, drank moderately, and talked about everything. Books, travel, adult children, money, eventually, because women who are actually friends talk about money. I was careful about what I shared, but I shared something, and it was received without drama or judgment. I also continued doing more with the trust. The tutoring program at Reverend Crowther's church grew steadily across 3 years of funding. New coordinators hired, hours extended, a second location considered. They named a reading room after me, the Marsh Reading Room, and I agreed, thinking of Harold's middle name with a private smile he would have appreciated. He had been a reader, Harold. Biographies mostly. He would have approved of a room full of books carrying his initial. I traveled purposefully. Scotland in the fall, the Isle of Skye, a cold hill above Portray. Harold's landscape finally seen after all the years of talking about it. You would have complained about the wind, I told him silently. You would have loved every minute. Patrick and Denise and the girls came for Christmas both years, filling the Indian Hill house exactly as it was meant to be filled. Noise and Pie and Rachel disappearing into the Cedar Library for hours at a stretch. Tyler visited when he could, still talking too fast about science, now deeply absorbed in competitive robotics that I made a genuine effort to understand, and mostly did. The college trust waited for him quietly, growing. He didn't know yet. He would, when the time came. As for Linda and Craig, Craig's job search went poorly, consulting work, then a sales position that ended after 8 months. They left the Beaver Creek rental after nearly 2 years for a smaller apartment closer to Linda's work. The marriage was, by all accounts, under strain. Linda was working full-time for the first time in years and was, according to Marianne's careful phrasing, tired but managing. I did not take satisfaction in their difficulty. It would be easy to dress vindication up as justice and call it righteous, but I had never wanted this outcome for them. Their suffering was real. Linda's exhaustion was real. Craig had made decisions that compressed their options, but fear makes people reach for things they shouldn't, and I understood that better than most. What I felt was something more precise than satisfaction: the absence of guilt. I had protected myself from people who intended to take what was mine, and I had done so cleanly, without cruelty, without destroying what didn't need to be destroyed. The consequences they lived with were the consequences of their own arithmetic. That is enough. It has to be. In the spring of the 3rd year, Linda called on a Sunday morning. My crossword time. The quiet hour that still belonged entirely to me. "Mom," she said. Her voice was different, quieter, older, scraped clean of the careful, rehearsed quality it had carried for so long. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I've wanted to for a while. I just kept not knowing how to start. I set down my pen. "I'm listening," I said. It was not a reconciliation. Not exactly, and not yet. But it was the beginning of something honest, which is always better than a comfortable lie. We talked for 40 minutes. I told her about Scotland. She told me about Tyler's robotics team placing 3rd in regionals. She did not mention Craig's name once. When we hung up, I sat for a while, with the morning light coming through the kitchen window and the cardinals at the feeder in the ash tree. Some doors close, I thought, and some just need more time. I kept the secret not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom I was still learning to trust. What I know now: dignity is not given to you. You build it quietly, one decision at a time, before anyone can see what you're building. If someone treats your love as a resource to be extracted, that is not love, and you are never too old to understand the difference. What would you have done in my place? If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.